I'm going to try to keep them on schedule, otherwise I'll throw off the whole day with my tardiness. Thank you all for coming. Everybody's enjoying nice weather. I wore shorts today. It's my first conference ever in shorts. I figured other people would be in shorts, so I'm in good company. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about Web3. I'm kind of here as a Web3 guy. Talk to you a bit about our journey and what we've been doing in Web3, and also, I think, as I said in the title of my presentation, about how Web3 has changed how I think about making games, because I've been making games for a while, not as long as many of you, but about 10 years across mobile and now the web as well. So let me, without further ado, jump into my presentation. A little bit of background on us. Animoca Brands is a global Web3 game developer. We have a relatively large geographic footprint. We're headquartered in Hong Kong, and we've grown through acquisition actually quite rapidly over the last 5 years. And so we take kind of a decentralized, model similar to maybe MTG or Embracer or other big game companies that like to be a collective of smaller studios. And I think that's also philosophically from our standpoint, because we think small studios make great games and are the best kind of unit of measurement of great game making. When I say small, that's anywhere from 20 to 200. So it's a loose definition of small. But we have a bunch of different games, across the ecosystem, and I'll point out that these are all Web3 native, just FYI, but in different types of categories. So everything from free-to-play mobile to more, sort of AAA console style to things like UGC platforms like the Sandbox, to collectibles marketplaces like Quid, for example. So a bunch of different stuff, and that's our core development business. And then we're also well known as an investor in this area. So we're one of the most prolific investors in Web3. We've invested in about 350 companies across the ecosystem. And this includes not just gaming, although gaming is the biggest portion of it, but it includes other things that are tangential to gaming. Because one of the transformational sort of powers of Web3 is that this prospect of interoperability between different applications, whether it is DeFi or marketplaces or tool sets, so wallets and layer 2 blockchain scaling solutions, and all of these different kinds of protocols that we can use within our games to enhance the functionality of games or onboard user communities from other experiences into ours, etc. So that's why we're working on building this ecosystem. And it's largely based on the principle of the network effect of interoperability of all these different pieces of content, because we really believe, and this is a sort of a fundamental philosophy to Web3, that the innovation comes from the fact that we work on open and composable assets. And so therefore we can all add value to the various projects in economies that each of us is creating. So to talk a little bit more about basics, and I apologize for some of you who may be quite familiar with Web3, but I wanted to kind of bring everybody to a similar sort of point of discussion. So what is a blockchain game? How is it different from a Web2 game? And why is this an improvement, or is it? Obviously, I'm in it's an improvement camp, fully disclosed. So in terms of game characteristics, when we think about games as we know them, players spend digital currency in the game, they customize and enhance their play, they personalize things, they extend their play time, they get bigger tanks and weapons, faster cars, whatever, and that's how players play in games. But within those games, the players don't actually really own any of those assets to the extent that they purchase them, but they don't have, complete agency over what they can do with those items. They cannot necessarily buy and sell them or take them out of the game. They're subject to whatever the developer decides they can do in the game. And some developers enable some of those functionalities that others do not. But the control of that is in the hands of the developer rather than the player. And so the developer, therefore, controls the in-game economy absolutely. So in a Web3 context, a Web3 game, in my opinion, is exactly the same. Players come, they have fun, they spend money, they buy stuff, they upgrade and enhance their experience, they extend their play time, etc. But the difference, the fundamental difference, is because of the blockchain aspect, they're able to own their own digital property, which means that those playable in-game items, which are NFTs, are able to then be traded either in a marketplace inside the game or on third-party marketplaces, and that's up to the user to decide what they like, what the player wants. And then there is also the possibility of interoperability between other game experiences and other Web3 native experiences. So that can be anything from taking your in-game item from one game to another game to use it in the other game environment, or to take it to some completely different application. So for example, several years ago when we launched our first game called Formula One Delta Time, we noticed an interesting phenomenon, which was people were buying our Formula One racing cars to play in the game, but some of them were perceived by the players as being quite valuable. And so they took those cars and they took them over to a DeFi, decentralized finance protocol called NiftyFi, and they would put them up as collateral to get DeFi loans. And they could do that because that NFT asset is an open and permissionless asset. It's theirs to do what they like with, just like I can take my car and take it, to the auto shop and put it up as collateral for a loan. So I think that's, the one fundamental difference is that you have to really rethink what it means to have an in-game economy, because the whole concept of the in-game economy is quite different in a Web3 context. And so what this means is that this has wide-reaching sort of impacts on the idea of how you conduct your user acquisition and how you maintain your player base. So I'm sure many of you who are familiar with Web3 games have heard people talk a lot about community. So community is first and foremost the most important thing when building a Web3 game. I say community because what Web3 is really good at, what tokenization is really good at, is creating incentive and retention mechanisms for players, because you have tokens to play with and everything in the game has value to the players. And because they have agency over it and there is transferability of value as a result, that means that value is an incentive. So you want to incentivize behavior in your game. You want to incentivize them to play longer or play more collaboratively with other people, share, invite friends to the game. There's all different kinds of things which we're very familiar with as game developers, as behaviors we want to incentivize. And I would argue that Web3 and tokenization gives you more powerful tools to kind of do what we've always been doing all along. Now, from an economic standpoint, the model, though, is quite different, because in a traditional Web2 game, you have a walled garden and you have essentially a hyperinflationary economy. It's a one-way sort of road, because I, as the developer, sell stuff to the customer buys stuff. That's how the business model works. There's advertising as well, of course. But in terms of in-game assets, it's a one-way sales system. Whereas in a Web3 game, it's kind of the opposite of that. The idea is that you're encouraging economic activity in the game. And economic activity is different from sales, because that economic activity actually may occur between players themselves. It's not necessarily stuff that I'm selling to the player. It's just me taking a commission, a trading fee, on the fact that players sold each other stuff. So you're essentially, as the developer, monetizing a secondhand market. You're owning that secondhand market through royalties that you get from the smart contracts. And I think that, in my view, is a much healthier ecosystem, because then you're incentivizing people's community building and participation, not just trying to sell all day long. And I don't know, for any of you who've been in free-to-play for a long time, it gets tiring. And so maybe I'll talk a little bit about how that works. This is my clip art diagram. That's your user acquisition funnel leading into the walled garden. It's the best analogy I could think about. But this really, I think, encapsulates what we largely call the attention economy, which is trying to keep people engaged as long as possible, because it's in service of this user acquisition funnel. It's how we make money from games. So you bring as many people into the funnel. I mean, all of you know this, obviously. You bring as many people into the funnel as possible and try to prevent them from leaking out. And hopefully, you get D7 retention in double digits and everything's good. But it's based on getting all those people into the funnel. Whereas in a Web3 context, you're actually thinking about it slightly differently. I like to make the analogy to a train station. Because if you think about a train station's idea is not to trap you in the train station. The idea is that you're just coming through all day long, and traffic and passengers come through all day long from one place to another place, but they're always passing through and generating revenue for you as they pass through, and you provide that service. You take a toll basically for them passing through. And so I think that's how we need to think about economic models within Web3 games. I'll give you an example of this. And this one is actually with a project that we didn't create. So it's a very Web3 analogy because it's, I think, the best example of interoperability are those where it's not just about the stuff that we make, but what other people in the community make as well. So many of you may be familiar with this. It's called the Bored Ape Yacht Club, which is one of the better known profile pic projects and NFT collections. And so we work closely with Yuga Labs, who are the original creators of the Bored Ape Yacht Club. And one of the projects that we did together with them is to launch a token for the community, which is called ApeCoin. We did that around, I guess, 3 months ago, maybe. And secondarily, we also announced at the end of last year that our studio, Enway in California, is building a fighting game that will feature the Bored Ape Yacht Club characters, which means that if you own a Bored Ape, then you can bring your Bored Ape to this game, and you will have a character representation inside the game. So we're adding utility and functionality for those Bored Ape community members inside this fighting game. The fighting game is also powered by ApeCoin. So if you have ApeCoin, that's what you spend in the game. So we already are generating now interoperability and utility for the Bored Apes. We have another project called the Sandbox, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a user-generated content platform. And within the Sandbox, we're launching season 3 in a couple of weeks. And in season 3, we'll have full interoperability with Bored Apes. So if you have a Bored Ape, you can then go into the Sandbox and you will have a voxel-style character based upon your Bored Ape. Again, providing additional utility for that community. And then on the bottom here, we have a game called Benji Bananas. Those of you who've been in mobile for a while might remember it. This is a game that our studio in Finland launched 11 years ago, I want to say. Free-to-play mobile game, you know, classic, swinging from rope to rope. But it has, wonderfully, an ape theme. So what we did was we opened it up to allow users to spend ApeCoin in Benji Bananas and earn rewards. Again, adding value and utility to the overall community of holders of both ApeCoin as well as the Bored Ape Yacht Club. And then the last piece, and there's actually more, but I thought this was good for the slide. We have a game called Rev Racing, which is a racing game. And so we have Benji Bananas themed livery as well as Sandbox themed livery for cars in Rev Racing, and special rewards and incentives for community members who can get those cars and play in Rev Racing. So the idea is to build an ecosystem around different types of IP to add value and enhance the community effects, because what you're doing is you're cross-pollinating between different products. People who own Bored Apes now will have the opportunity to play 4 other games, and they might enjoy some of them, they might not enjoy some of them, and they will work through this ecosystem and continue, hopefully, to spend money and enhance the value of all those products by being good community members. I think the important thing to note here, and I thought about this when I was putting the slide together, is it's very important from a Web3 context that not everything up here is made by us, because that's not the point of Web3. That would be just us being a big game company, which is why I picked the Bored Ape Yacht Club, because that's actually not our project. And so I think it's important to note that it's about being able to enhance the value of different projects. So for example, we are creating a fighting game with the Bored Ape Yacht Club because that community is a great community. And because those are open and composable assets, we can create a game where we'll have an initial audience of 10,000, you know, what we would call whales in traditional gaming. And they can onboard to our game. And that's very interesting. That's why I leverage that IP from a game developer's perspective to make a game that will attract those users. But at the same time, there's a network effect, because if I'm creating a great game, it makes more sense to become a Bored Ape Yacht Club holder and to buy a Bored Ape. So I actually then, by creating the game, add value to the overall collection. So it's a win-win for both parts. So in summary, I think, digital property rights, I think, is the most exciting part. I think that's fundamental to all the experiences. We think this brings a lot more fairness to players, because it allows players to have more agency over their digital stuff and what they want to do with it. And the ecosystem growth, obviously, with network effects. So I wanted to also talk about some of the so-called downsides or criticisms. Sorry, hold on one second. So user onboarding being difficult. Yes, user onboarding is difficult. And that's due to the fact, I think it comes from two factors. One is, obviously, players don't all have blockchain wallets, which very often you need to play a blockchain game. Some games have inbuilt custodial wallets, and there are solutions being made so that you can abstract all these things to middleware in the background. But the solutions are not perfect yet. It's early days. And I think that we lose sight of the fact, especially like I'm coming from a mobile background, user onboarding on mobile is ridiculously simple. And I think that 10 years of mobile gaming has really lulled consumers into a false sense of onboarding simplicity, because everybody forgets when they first had to set up a Google Pay account or an iTunes account that actually connecting your credit card and putting in all your details was a pain in the ass, and it didn't work very well, right? Did anybody try to set up a Google Play account in 2012? It was horrible. But that onboarding pain was a decade ago, so I've forgotten it. And now when I download apps, I'm like, oh, 2 clicks. And so I expect that that's the way things should work as a consumer, but it's actually not as straightforward as it would seem on the surface. So that's the first part. Second part is I would think about, this is the diffusion of innovation curve. And I wanted to just, for my own benefit, kind of make a little timeline from a mobile perspective of some of the sort of milestone games in the development of mobile. And this is more from a user popularity standpoint. But I think it's interesting to put into perspective where we are in blockchain gaming. So we're just before Doodle Jump, right? I think that's really important to recognize. When people start to critique how difficult it is, don't forget that games that have made headlines in this sector, whether it's collectible games like NBA Top Shot or games like Axie Infinity, these are all games that have literally had to invent technologies just to function, because they're doing something new that's never been tried before. So I think, I like to cut them some slack as a result. And speaking of Axie Infinity, just a little reminder, because some people always ask, is Axie Infinity a Ponzi scheme? And this is revenue of the game, according to CryptoSlam, because of course everything's on chain, so you can go and see it. And as you see, there was a bit of an aberration in 2021 to the chart when they traded billions of dollars of items a month. But I think it's important to look at what their actual monthly revenue was in the month of June in various years. People forget that the game has been out since the end of 2017. This is a game that was built, originally conceived and begun development on within months of the invention of the NFT. So for people who complain that, the game is not great or not fun or something, it's a 5-year-old game that was created when the technology was literally invented. And they've been doing an incredible job of innovating and creating different technologies to enable their play to happen. And as you can see, it's still what I would call quite a successful game at this point, despite the overall crash in crypto markets, technology stocks, etc. And the last question people always ask, they're like, oh, blockchain games aren't very fun. And that's a common criticism levied at the industry. And I think that that's actually just a function of time, because it takes a long time to make a fun game. And we're a young industry. Most people in this industry we've been in it for 5 years. Most people have been in it for 1 or 2. and that's not even long enough to make a game. So I think that needs to be recognized. So I want to leave you finally with a few minutes of a couple of products that we have upcoming and out in the market that will give you some ideas of what kind of experiences are available. And these are all out and available now. So obviously what you're seeing here is everything here is made with the voxel editor. So when you enter the sandbox, you can use the editing tools. And so users can create literally everything that you see here. All the items that you create are minted as NFTs, so those can be traded or sold in the marketplace. And your environment is populated with everything that you create, and it's up to you to decide what you want to create, whether it's a game or it's an art gallery or just a place to hang out with your friends or a live streaming venue. The original concept for the voxel art style was to make it as accessible as possible for creators, because obviously not everybody's an artist. So that would be a UGC platform. And this would be more of a sort of traditional AAA style.
People of Earth, the Deep Agency needs you.
And this is in alpha now. Actually, we just launched the first NFT collection.
Set off Fort Dolos, mankind's
and
future
Benjamin
homeland,
from
occupied by very terrifying and dangerous
enemies.
enemies. As an agent, it will be your responsibility to fight for a brighter future and a safe settlement. First, train in our hyper-realistic VR sessions in the base of operations. Then, venture with other agents on your first assignments. Together, you will accomplish your duty and secure our new home. This can include a bit of fun sometimes. We need you to make a difference out there. Enlist today for better tomorrows.
Mix up genres. So this would be part of our racing ecosystem. And this is Talker 2 from our Beats Monkey studio in Melbourne. And their focus is obviously on drifting. Subsegment of the overall racing category.
Snap for the sun like Diddy. The riches got a mad ass son. I'm like Billy. I ain't never switch up. Whole team with me. But known for my city like OAGs. Set the pace as long as you finish. Consumers find a way inside the business. Fabulous, they try to dabble in it and they hate the fact that they may have to witness. You trying to aim for the top like this and you're in your element with a fire like this. And then when you fall and they praying you miss. But it's all in the risk. I got you with the switch. You know. I'm in the zone. Give me the throne.
And last but not least, oops, sorry. There we go. Phantom Galaxies. Cool. So that was, our latest lineup, and everything you saw, all those games, all the NFTs, all the playable items in the games are NFTs. They trade in their own marketplaces or on OpenSea and other third-party marketplaces. And hopefully we're injecting a little bit more fun into the blockchain game community. But thank you very much. I'd like to actually open it up to questions. So if people have questions, that would be great. I guess, do you want to go ahead? I think we have a microphone running around. I don't know, maybe we can give it to somebody over here then if you're there.
Hello? Okay. Hi, thanks so much for the presentation. That was really interesting. I have a couple of questions, but I'll only do one because it looked like lots of people wanted to ask things. So my first question is, when do you think that this issue with people onboarding for these games, how far do you think it is away? I'm the founder of a company that works with probably about a dozen blockchain studios, and the holy grail for them is always, we can't just be thinking the crypto crowd, we've got to widen it out to gamers. And we did a test recently where we got 2 of the people from within our own studio to try and sign up for one of the biggest blockchain games in the world right now. I won't say which one it is. And one of them, the one who really knows crypto, it took them an hour to get set up. The other one couldn't even get set up to actually even see what the game was. They just gave up. They got really super frustrated. And I said, okay, end of experiment. How long do you think it might be before that crossover actually occurs? Because at the moment, it seems like it's quite a long way off. And that seems like a huge barrier to getting people to get involved with these games. And it was really nice to see some of the things you had on the screen there, because there's some really good examples of exciting things. And we know that's been a problem. So breaking that barrier down will make a big difference. But this onboarding issue, when it's so long, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that. Thank you so much.
I think first, I'd say the most successful blockchain games at the moment by financial metrics or user engagement metrics tend to be the oldest. And so as a result, the way that they onboard users reflects 2018 or 2019, probably when they were first conceived. There's a lot more middleware out there now. We've invested in many of those companies as well. So there are solutions like custodial wallets and things where you can basically come in and sign up with an email account, and that's it. And it will create your wallet in the background and abstract everything to the background. But you'll have to look at, I'd say, stuff that's out very, very recently. I mean, I'll mention one of our games because it came out last week, MotoGP Ignition, which is a racing game, motorcycle racing game. So all you need is an email. You go to your email, confirm, wallet is set up, everything's in the background, and that's it. But that's not mainstream. So I'd say, it's going to be more mainstream in the next 12 months. But I think user numbers are going to continue to be small. And I think one thing to be mindful of as game developers is not to be dismayed at user numbers that are in the tens of thousands, because you have to remember that ARPU is ridiculously high because people own stuff. So it's like thinking about the price you pay for rent versus the price you pay to buy a house. They're different. So it's just the numbers are different.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry, do you want to go ahead? Yeah, go for it. Actually, he's coming if you don't mind. This gentleman down here. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
I mean, I heard a lot about blockchain, but it seems it all boils down to owning an ID. And in what you showed, it's very nice to have the integration. But at the end, the game is missing the monetization, like in the example you made in Apes, because they don't sell the NFTs themselves. So why should a game do that? It sounds like marketing. And also, is like blockchain gaming really boiled down to owning an NFT? Like, this is like the centralized ownership or the centralized gameplay.
Okay, so I think there's 2 ways, at least at the moment. There are 2 ways typically that people make money from games, and I'm going to use racing games because it's an easy analogy because we've made a lot of racing games. So in our racing games, for example, you can do you spend money in the game in one of 2 ways. You either buy a car from us, so we make money selling you cars, or from secondary trading fees from people selling cars, or we make money also from fees. because people pay entry fees to enter races and participate in races and to upgrade their cars. And so even if you were to bring a car from another place into our environment, then if you want to enter a race, you need to pay a fee. And so we can generate fees from people who come from other places as well as people who originate from our place. You look skeptical. Okay. But that's, I would say, probably best practices at the moment.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the talk. I'm interested. I saw in one of the trailers that the app is available in both App Store and Google Play. It kind of ties into the user acquisition story, right?
Yes.
As you said, people are used to, I press download and I get the game. I'm curious how you see things evolve with Apple and Google, especially in light of the recent, at least announced regulations for Apple, or I guess the big guys. My question is, do you see realistically the market integrate with Apple and Google, right? Or do you more see like, the app being itself and users are kind of forced to go to the website and do all of the purchasing or transactions there, versus, I guess, integrating it natively?
I think as a longtime mobile developer, I can say that we've always developed our products based on whatever the rules in the App Store were. And we've spent a lot of time with that, whether it's for natural organic discovery and other things. And I think at the moment, one of the things our industry struggles with in terms of being able to attract larger audiences is a lack of clarity from the app stores in how they approach Web3 games. And I think the problem comes from two parts. One is that Web3 games are very new. And the second part is that not all the games are similar. Some of them are very different. Some of them have, in-game currencies that are tokenized that you can spend money, but no playable NFTs. Some have playable NFTs. At the moment, market best practices tends to be to do all kinds of trading activity on the web outside the app. And then inside the app, you basically bring those NFTs in as collections, and you import them. So you basically link a user account that's in the mobile app to a blockchain wallet that's in the marketplace. But it's a hack.
We see it improve in the future, I hope, right?
Oh, for sure, for sure. Well, and also I think it's important for the platforms to understand that we as an industry want to just understand how to work within their system. If they want to levy a fee for providing incredible distribution platforms, that's fine. We're more than happy to pay fees. I think one of the things that unfortunately got too much noise in the early days of our industry was this idea that we would no longer need to pay platform fees as developers. But it's a ridiculous notion because they give us such incredible distribution.
Hi, thanks for the talk, very informative. My question is about that point when you said play and earn games are not a Ponzi scheme. I remember that they used to be called, especially during the Axie peak, they used to be called play to earn games. And now we're calling them play and earn games. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that very small change in naming and why.
Sure. I think it's because it more reflects the reality. Because if you look at even Axie Infinity itself, Axie existed for many years with lots of people who were there just because they enjoyed playing the game. They enjoyed being part of the community. And it was a small community. And then what happened was the market recognized that there was actually a mechanism by which you could make money playing the game. It's not dissimilar to financial markets and other places where people see an opportunity to make money. And because it's an open marketplace, they did so. But that was never the focus of the game for the developers either. But I think they tried to accommodate the feature sets of the game as it evolved beyond their wildest dreams to figure out how do I cater to all these different kinds of audiences, because now I've got a new audience who's come to me for a different reason that I didn't originally expect. And so I think they've done a reasonable job at trying to manage the growth under those circumstances, but they were the first ones. I mean, Alex, the CEO of Sky Mavis, I saw him over a year ago speak at a panel and be like, look, we should be calling it play and earn because that's what it's always been, because some people came here to earn and some people came to play.
Hey, what's your opinion on the current Yuga Labs project with Improbable? And do you think that, seeing as, they're a totally different platform, I guess, and studio, at what point do you see yourself being fully interoperable with their games and other companies like that as well?
I think the hope is to always be as interoperable as possible, but the interoperability piece is really hard. I mean, that's why I put the caveat on my other slide. Full interoperability of playable NFTs between games is really hard, right? We start with the basic stuff like graphical art styles and token compatibility, but then you get into the nitty-gritty of stuff like, if I have a sword in this game that has power of 10, what's the power of the sword in this game? That interpolation is going to be really hard, which is why we do it at the moment on a really bespoke basis. We really have to manually integrate collections between games because there are no good industry standards. I can say, though, that we are working on it as an industry. I myself participate in a group with, a couple dozen companies where we get together monthly and we're trying to figure out how to set standards because we need them. Otherwise, we won't be able as an industry to deliver interoperability.
You mentioned the blockchain games, but which blockchain is it using and why did you choose that specific blockchain?
So the ones that I showed are using Polygon. Let me see, what did I show? Polygon. I think all the ones I showed are using Polygon, which is a scaling solution for Ethereum. And MotoGP that I just mentioned is on Flow. And I think there are different choices, different reasons for choosing different blockchains. I would say the choice of blockchain is not as important as sometimes developers might think. From a technical standpoint, I'd say actually it's just as important from a community standpoint to see what kind of audience do you think your game will attract and what kind of audience are you interested in connecting with, and then what kind of audience already exists typically on that chain. So for example, there's a game called Star Atlas, which has not yet been released, but very successfully last year pre-sold many of their NFTs from their upcoming game on Solana. And one of the reasons that I think they were not just successful, but in an outsized way successful, is because the Solana community didn't have much game content and was very excited about the prospect of game content of that style. So it's also about finding your community niche. I think that's quite important.
Just a quick follow-up question. Is there a concern, say there's like a smart contract bug or an exploit or a hack, and all these tokens get stolen by one entity? Is there a concern from a game point of view that you might say to the players that the tokens are gone and we can't do anything? Like, how are game studios managing that, or is it not really a thought at the moment? Because it has happened in the past.
Yes.
And I think Ethereum famously had to hard fork to try and fix something, but that's not always going to be a possible solution. So
correct, yeah. Correct. And I think what you find is that those things happen less and less. I mean, obviously there were some famous hacks this year, Axie Infinity being the biggest one. But that was less about technology than it was about, human factor, manipulation. But yes, it's always a concern. It's why we audit all our smart contracts and why there are several good auditing firms to do so. And I think that although I'm actually still, we were having this conversation actually just before this presentation. I think our biggest concern as developers still tends to be securing our own staff and employees against manipulation rather than the technology.
You mean having a rogue developer who could steal?
No. Meaning hackers coming in and getting your employees to click on.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Oh yeah, well, both I suppose is possible.
Yeah, like phishing hacks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for the talk, Robbie. Just to build on that Solana point you just made, we were in Cardano and we were the first game there, and we absolutely managed to maximize a community that didn't have an enormous amount going on. So we're very much in the sandbox metaverse type space. So I was interested as owners of the sandbox, but also investors in Decentraland, I believe you are, having spent time in UGC and trying to overcome, I guess, an experience which needs users and creativity in order to gain momentum rather than immediate gratification of fun. Yes. How are you feeling about that, having worked on those projects for a while now, and sure. What would you do differently, or how are you thinking about it differently these days?
I think that with the sandbox, we've been quite pleased with the reception from players. And I think that the reason for the positive reception is frankly just because we put in the work, to be honest. Because with the sandbox, we knew that creating a UGC platform was going to be a really daunting task. The worst thing is to go into a shopping mall and all the storefronts are empty. You know, it's a bad experience for customers. And so what we did was in 2018, we set up a creator fund, which we seeded with initially $1 million. And we gave out $50 and $100 grants to graphic designers to create content, and just said, we have these new tools, create some cool stuff, and then it's going to be in, you know, and it'll be yours, you own it. This is just a grant, make some cool stuff. And so we started that, we topped up the fund. And so over a period of 2.5 years, we ended up with thousands and thousands of creators creating content, but initially with our stimulus, so to speak.
Do you think you're sort of over that initial stimulus now, and it's self-fulfilling and it's got its own momentum?
More than a year ago.
All right, brilliant.
Yeah. But it was that push that got the snowball rolling, so to speak.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christian from AudioMob. This is a great presentation, and it's really refreshing to see a Web3 game where the unit economics seems to be as concentrated on as the actual look of the game. They look great. Web3 advertising, is that a trend that you've seen, or do you know, have you seen any examples of advertising being used in the Web3 sense?
So it's not yet, and UA is really hard because the ad networks have not come to Web3 yet. So there are no sort of traditional ways that you can work in Web3, but there are people who are working on it, particularly working on things like in 3D representations where they can do fills of physical billboards and stuff like that. So there are companies that are doing that now.
Great, thank you.
Hi there, great talk. I work on the Rengoku Legends brand, so we've obviously got money in this space and things like this. What do you, at this point in time, there's been some questions about, you mentioned the crypto market yourself, about assets being stolen, things like this. The moment the Web3 market feels like that it is completely lawless and anarchistic in some ways, and even like the Barbary pirates created rules within themselves of how to operate. Do you think that governments are going to get those rules in first, or do you think that the Web3 space is going to join up and resolve some of those issues first?
I think the community will figure it out first, only because governments are slow to act. Although I do think there needs to be more government regulation, both in terms of financial regulation as well as content moderation. I think that's just a personal opinion. Yeah, I think the communities will do it first. And the analogy I like to make is, if we think about, because I was at a conference talking with some people about content moderation and online harm and stuff like that, and figuring out how that might be different in a Web3 context. And so I make an analogy to the physical world, where when you own a shop and somebody comes in and starts causing trouble in your shop, you deal with it because it's your shop and you own it. And I think that, and the same thing applies in your home, for example. And so I think the ownership mentality in Web3 may start to bleed over into this idea that we have to take some agency also for our own virtual stuff inside places. Like obviously a UGC environment like the sandbox is an obvious one. People create their own spaces within the overall space. And so I want to manage and make sure that people behave in a way that's conducive to the community and not nasty, because it's my space and I feel a sense of ownership over it. I don't think that solves the problems by any stretch, but I do think hopefully it will influence them in a more positive direction.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I think one of the things that's pushing back NFT gaming and Web3 is the perception that whenever you mint something or you create a smart contract, there's the effect on the environment. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. So there is always an effect, I mean, in absolute terms. Most games these days are built on, either if they're built on Ethereum, they're built on layer 2 scaling solutions, which are, not carbon neutral, but they are very, very close. So they basically batch transactions, as you may know, and then run them through as a single Ethereum transaction. So I think when you start to compare the environmental footprint of blockchain games, they're not dissimilar to traditional games at this point, provided that they're built on more modern scaling solutions. Sorry, I just got the orchestra music from the back, so I think we're going to have to wrap it up. But thank you very much, everybody.